Parenting podcasts can be a bit earnest. Parenting Out Loud is not that podcast.
This person who I may not agree with politically is trying to talk about integrating children, not just into his professional life, but into public life.
I have referred to myself as one and done. That article did make me rethink the term.
It took about 11 seconds for this to go viral.
Oh God, is this the ejaculate one? That is deranged and I love it.
Parenting changes the way you see everything. Parenting Out Loud takes the big conversations of the moment and puts them through that filter.
Because if parents are thinking about it, we're talking about it.
Parenting Out Loud. Listen weekly wherever you get your podcasts.
You're listening to a Mamma Mia podcast.
Oh, hi there. It's Claire Murphy here. We hope you're enjoying our time together on Well, and we are hoping that you have also managed to stay awake while we've been looking at all things to do with sleep. In our last 4 episodes, we've looked at why you can't sleep, sleep disorders like narcolepsy and insomnia, sleep hygiene too, which is really big on social media right now, as well as how to meditate and practice mindfulness, which is all part of the same conversation. So in this episode, we're sharing a no-filter conversation about the 7 types of rest and how they can help give you the energy you need.
From Mamma Mia, I'm Mia Freedman. You're listening to the No Filter podcast, and I have a question for you. Are you tired? I'm tired, and I've been gagging to have the conversation you're about to hear and share it with you. If you're anything like me and you're tired, maybe you've tried to make sure you're getting enough sleep. Maybe you had an early night, or maybe you even asked your GP to run a few tests, but nothing seems to work. Nothing came up. Physically, you're okay, but you still feel so tired. Today, I got some answers for you. It's going to change your life, change mine. Saundra Dalton-Smith is a physician and she also works in the area of work-life integration, and she's a self-described nerd. After a period of intense burnout in her own life, she discovered that there are 7 key ways in which we become fatigued and 7 different kinds of rest that we need to restore and recharge. And spoiler alert, none of them are sleep. So if you're feeling really tired and getting more sleep isn't helping, it might be one of these other areas that you need rest in. Saundra's framework has totally changed the way I see my own life. I can't emphasize enough what an aha moment it's been. I've told everybody about the 7 types of rest. I've become completely obsessed with sharing it with my friends, with my family, with my coworkers, and I'm so excited to share the 7 types of rest with you right now. Here's Dr. Saundra Dalton-Smith. You're a physician. Can you tell me a little bit about your life before you burnt out?
Yes, I absolutely love being a physician. I don't think there was anything that I wanted to do other than that. That's all I could ever recall from the age of 5. And so when I finished residency and went into practice, everything was fantastic until I had kids. I could work 60, 70 hours a week, no problem. I was married at the time. I still was able to make it all function. However, when my husband and I decided to start a family, that's when it all hit the wall. And that's really when the burnout started. I had no system in place for adding anything else to my life. And we had our children pretty close together, back to back, 21 months apart. I really didn't have a system when we added 2 to our life. And that's really when the burnout period started. I think for myself, it was just a matter of realizing that I had the life I'd been building. I'd for years been building this practice, wanted these children, this house, this family, all of the things. And I built a life that I really had no energy to enjoy.
That's interesting and very, very familiar. What did burnout look like for you? Because obviously when you've got 2 little kids, the sleep deprivation is a whole new thing. And that is a level of tiredness that it is hard to explain to someone before they're actually in it. So during that period, I imagine when your kids were small, the actual physical tiredness, was that at the top of your tiredness deficit?
Unfortunately not. I thought that's what would be the issue. And actually at the time all of this was happening, I really didn't have a framework for the 7 types of rest. That didn't exist. I just knew I was tired.
Yeah.
And so just like you mentioned, I assumed that it was just I needed more sleep. I had children waking me up all hours. And I thought that was the problem. And so I did what I felt I needed to do to fix that and get 7, 8, 9 hours of sleep. And I think it really dawned on me that something is missing here when I remember waking up one day and it was like 10 hours. Like I'd been in bed forever. We'd hired somebody to do all the things and help out. And I was getting all this sleep and I was still exhausted. And I think that's when it really hit me that there is some part of myself that's fatigued. And I don't even understand what it is to begin the process of trying to get better.
So then what did you do?
Well, I'm a nerd. So for me, if there's a problem, you figure it out. And I'm a biochemistry major. So you always go to the smallest unit of something to try to understand it. And so for myself, it was a matter of, okay, I'm tired. Let me figure out what kind of tired I am. That was kind of the beginning of this process. There's something in me exhausted and I haven't nailed it yet. And so I started looking at really just the energy I used in a day. Like, where am I expending energy? And I started writing all these different activities that were a part of my job as a physician and as a parent. And that's where the divisions of the type of rest began. There were way more than 7 when it started because it was just like this running list of things I'm looking at. But there were so many things that grouped together. And so as I started grouping things together, and because I was actively seeing patients at the time, I was trying to heal myself, I was able to bring in some of their information and hear their stories of fatigue and bring in some of their information as well in the initial process.
As a physician, and as you say, a self-described nerd and a biochemistry major, the first place we look for causes of tiredness tend to be physical, right, in the body. So you go, okay, if I've had enough sleep and I'm still tired, am I sick? Do I have an iron deficiency? Is there some underlying health concern that I might have? Is it chronic fatigue? Did you go there first? What made you then even think that there were other contributing factors to tiredness?
You're absolutely right. That is where I began. I think because of my background, the first thing I did was start looking at all of my vitamin levels, all of my hormone levels. I started looking at different things regarding, well, if I eat more of this or less of this, and thinking about caffeine and how I was consuming. I did all the natural things. None of the tests came back abnormal. Getting more sleep did not seem to solve the problem. I still would wake up tired. Getting a massage or taking a me day or even going on vacation, all of the conventional things that normally we try when you're tired, none of it worked. And I think I really got to a place of desperation because it's really disheartening when you've done all of the things conventional science and medicine tells you should fix you. At the time, we were in the middle of something called a sleep revolution. I mean, Ariana Huffington was talking about it and everybody was talking about sleep. And it was such an overwhelming conversation about sleep.
I found that so annoying, Saundra. I found it really annoying. Like Ariana Huffington.
Desperate situation.
I know everyone needed to sleep and everyone does need to sleep, but I just found it very simplistic. And maybe you're identifying why. Because once my kids were a bit older, I was sleeping through the night. I was doing all of that, but the tiredness was something different. How did you come to 7 different types? And maybe we should start by you just listing out what they are for people who are new to this idea.
Yes, absolutely. So the 7 are physical, mental, spiritual, emotional, social, sensory, and creative. And really from that whole disconnect with the sleep revolution, like you stated, I felt like it was not serving me. I started leaning more into this concept of sleep and rest can't be the same thing. So now I need to define what rest is and then actually help quantify it in such a way that we can actually understand when we are thriving in it and when we're deficient in it. And so that's where this whole concept of the 7 types of rest deficits, and being able to identify rest deficits, and even just the conversation of sleep and rest not being the same thing.
And let's start with physical, because you might not be a very active person. You know, it's not just about I've gone for a massive run and I'm training for a marathon and now I'm tired. Let's talk about how we expend energy physically.
Yes, everything that we're doing that uses our physical body uses some level of physical energy. So if you're a mom and you're lifting up kids and those kind of things, doing laundry and dishes, or if you're a nurse, if you're walking around the hospital or moving patients around, or if you're a teacher and you're carrying loads of books from one classroom to another, if you're someone who's in IT and you're sitting at a desk, even the body ergonomics of the workstation that you're at puts a demand on your physical body. So there's multiple different ways that our physical body is using energy. You know, the things you're looking for are, does my body feel good? Do I have neck ache or muscle aches or are my legs swelling? Those types of things that are evaluating the circulation, the lymphatics, muscle flexibility, all of that's a part of well-being within the physical aspect.
I always read about people who wake up in the morning and like jump out of bed. Is that an indicator of that you are physically rested?
Well, that could be an indication that you are well rested on many fronts, because if you're jumping out of bed, maybe your motivation's high too. So you have a lot of spiritual rest, or maybe mentally you're in a good mood. So you have that as well. So there's lots of components that add to that. I tend to question more when someone comes out of bed after 7-8 hours and they're dragging. It's like, okay, what's the problem here?
What about mental rest? What are some of the things that causes us to feel mentally exhausted?
Yes, mental energy is used when we are concentrating, when we're focusing on things. Multitasking tend to use quite a bit of mental energy. Anytime we're processing and reasoning through things, everything from going through your email, studying for a test, when you're doing deep work in any sense or form is a type of mental work that you're doing, mental energy that you're using.
So when you're having to think, when you're having to be alert, mentally alert, process a lot of information.
Decisions, if you're doing a lot of decisions, decision fatigue is an effect of that mental rest deficit.
What about emotional rest? What makes us emotionally exhausted?
Yeah, this is actually the one that I was deficient in and didn't even think it was a thing. I was carrying quite a bit of what I now term as professional emotional labor, meaning that there's parts of myself that I had to keep in a place of professionalism. However, there was a bit of inauthenticity to my normal personality that I had to step into to be that person. And I think a lot of us do this, whether you're an entrepreneur or you're someone who's on stage, or, you know, if you're leading a company, or for myself, I'm in an ER ICU situation at times as an internist. And I'm an empath. I'm the type of person who cries at the sappy commercials. You know, that's my personality. I'm very soft-hearted. However, you would never see me cry in a medical situation. I have learned how to lock down every emotion in those moments because it doesn't serve my patients or my nursing staff. And so every day I would keep all of that in check. And I never thought about finding a place to release it, finding a place to experience the emotional rest. So I kept loading up my professional emotional labor in my emotional backpack every day with no place to release it. And then with children coming on top of that, I did not expect the emotions of parenting. First steps, crying all night long, needing you, pull, all of those extra emotions. I had no reserves. And that's what put me over the top.
So if I had a fight, say, with my husband before I came into the studio to talk to you today, the fight would have required emotional energy, and then presenting myself to you as a professional person in this situation and suppressing everything that I've just gone through, that would also require emotional energy. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly right. Or if you're in customer service and someone's being a jerk, and you put a smile on your face and you're serving the customer. A lot of us use quite a bit of emotional energy in ways we don't even recognize. And then we wonder why we're so emotionally toxic, because we have built in inauthenticity as a part of being professional, which I see the reason for it and the place for it. But we also have to have a counterpart to that so that we understand we have to have places where we can be unfiltered, where we can be real, where we can just say it as it needs to be said and not feel like we have to hold it back.
Does empathy use up emotional energy?
Empathy does to some degree. What happens oftentimes when we're empathic is we are able to kind of step into the emotions of other people, but we have to make sure that we are not assuming responsibility for those emotions. I can sit with the pain of someone in a near-death type situation and not leave the room feeling like death. I can leave that room not feeling as if I'm experiencing it in real time with them. I am just empathic to the pain that they're going through. I'm willing to be in the moment with their pain. And I think that's the part of the training that we don't get. Physicians don't get it. Nurses don't get it. None of us are really taught how to experience hard things that drain us, especially emotional hard things, and then how to restore back that same area that we used energy from emotionally.
We're talking at a time in the news cycle. I mean, the news cycle is never good. That's the point of the news cycle, right? Always terrible, but it's particularly terrible at the moment. There's a war going on. In Australia, we've got a particular time of some terrible crimes against women. So there's a lot of bleakness and despair. And I think a lot of people are finding it very hard to know how to process that. Is that emotional exhaustion that we're feeling? I've heard the term compassion fatigue.
Yes. Compassion fatigue falls under emotional rest deficits, forms of it. There's so many things that have happened really since 2020, it seems, where there's like emotional drain upon emotional drain. You know, a big part of that is just understanding just some of the science of trauma and how it affects each of us differently. Some of us can watch the news and these things and it doesn't attach to us as much because we don't have backgrounds maybe that have similar traumas or similar empathic feelings that we've had to process. For some people who've already dealt with trauma, gotten to a place where they are healed enough to be able to experience it and keep moving, to be then reintroduced to it is like having the trauma come back all over again. And so I find that we each have to really be responsible for just our emotional environment, what we allow ourselves to be infused in, and be aware that all of that emotional input has an effect on us.
Is the hopelessness we feel when we see others suffer, whether in the news, in other parts of the world, or in our own lives with the people that we know and love, is that also emotionally exhausting?
It is. And, you know, the beauty of that is that because there are hard things that happen in the world that we don't want to turn a blind eye to. We want to be aware of and we want to see how we can be a part of the solution if we can in any way. But that's where some of the other types of rest that I'll mention just briefly here because they kind of fit in. One is spiritual rest. I know oftentimes when I have conversations with, if I'm speaking with companies or at a group and I mention spiritual rest, very often people automatically kind of divert off to the religion part of it. But spiritual rest at its very core is this sense that we all have that we need belonging and we need love and that we want to feel accepted and that our life has meaning and purpose. So when you're seeing some of these hard things, a part of spiritual rest is the filling up that we get when we know that we have a part to play. So what is your part to play in some of the things that you see? Because sometimes that helps restore us because we see that, you know, I may not be able to travel and be boots on the ground, so to speak, in some of these places, but I can be an advocate. I can speak up for the voiceless. I can give funds to organizations that are boots on the ground and supporting. You know, what is it that you can do that really helps you see the humanity part of it and how the spiritual connection you can have with another person, maybe around the world, who is in need that you can be of service to?
That's so interesting. What taxes us spiritually?
When we don't feel like our life has meaning. I find that one of the biggest spiritual disconnects that with a lot of people, particularly people who even say that they're atheists or that they don't have a spiritual belief system or a religious belief system at all, is that all of us want to know that we are giving to the greater good. We want to know that our life has some type of value, that we're contributing to the greater good. And so what we're seeing when people don't have that, when they feel like they are just kind of, if they're not here, it wouldn't matter, you know, they're not really connecting with other people, that things start losing the love of life is what I call it. The zest of life, that thing that actually really makes you want to get up out of bed every day because you see it as something bigger than just you going through the day by yourself.
Sensory rest is a really interesting one. I think we live in a world where we've never been more sensorially stimulated. What taxes our senses in an average day?
everything basically that we use, from our phones to our computers to the lights and the noise that we have in our home, whether it's the refrigerators making noise or our TVs that are playing, to the honking of horns that are, on our commute to and from work. There's constant sounds in our environment. And I think when you start thinking about just when you're sitting at your desk, let's say if you're at an office, are you hearing other people talking in other rooms? You're a nurse. Are you hearing ventilators going off? If you're a teacher, are you hearing background noise in the halls and the other classes? If you're a pilot, are you hearing the droning of the plane all day long? All of these things have an effect on not only how we experience sensory overload, but also how our personalities sometimes respond to that. Quite a few people, when they become sensory overwhelmed, actually experience irritation, agitation, rage, or anger. That is their psychological response to the sensory overwhelm. A lot of people use terms like Zoom fatigue and, terms like that. And that's really what they're experiencing, a sensory rest deficit.
I've been thinking about scrolling as you're talking, how in many ways people use it to rest, scrolling through their phone, scrolling social media, but you never feel very rested after you do it.
Yeah, that's escapism is what I call that. It's the same thing about Netflixing and chill, laying around watching a series on TV where you just kind of zone out a little bit. Scrolling is a lot like zoning out. You get to escape a moment into the scroll or to the TV show. And it's not very restful because it actually doesn't tap into the place of your deficit. You can get a little bit of creative rest if you're watching a movie and it inspires you in some way, or maybe something online that you're scrolling inspires you. So yes, you potentially could get some creative rest there, but normally we're not actually even approaching it in that way. We're approaching it just to kind of have a moment to escape from all the other things that have been going on in our life.
I'll be honest, I'm not so sure about that one, because I find that I do get a kind of rest when I'm, say, watching Bridgerton in bed. But doom scrolling on my phone, well, that's, yes, definitely an energy drain. Here's more from Saundra about creative rest, which is very close to my heart.
Hello, friends. It's Holly Wainwright jumping into your ears, not literally, that would be weird, to tell you about the next season of Mid and how it's all about you. You see, over the last 5 seasons, we've talked about everything on Mid, from marriage and divorce to hormones and fashion and sex and grief, life, right? And we've had so much feedback from you about your own messy middles that we have decided to make a season all about that, about you and the challenges that you're facing. The next season of Mid is all about dilemmas and wisdom and sharing both those things. And I am phoning in my friends to help. Hopefully, we're going to sort it out. And me and my more qualified mates, we are really going there. Mid, Conversations for Gen X Women Who Are Anything But, is back in your ears with your questions on Tuesday, July 15th.
When you talk about creative rest and expending energy creatively, what does that look like? I've heard you talk about problem solving, which I never thought about as being a form of creative energy.
Yeah, and that's the problem. So many of us use an excessive amount of creative energy, but we don't think of ourselves as creative. We have more entrepreneurs in the world now than ever, which is a creative process. You have to be creative to create a product, present a product, make courses, whatever it is that you're doing, problem solving. If you're balancing schedules, if you're a parent and you got 2 kids in different activities and you're trying to balance these schedules out, that requires creative energy. If your finances are not the best right now because of the economy and you're balancing your checkbook, that requires creative energy. It's not just the artists and the musicians and the painters. Yes, absolutely. We know they're using creative energy. All of us are using creative energy all day long to some degree. And because we don't appreciate our own creative nature, we ignore the fact that we need to be inspired to keep our level of innovation intact. That's one of the things that when we work with companies, that is a big part of it, is that everybody wants their employees to be more innovative, but no one's taking into account how do you help them to build that part of themselves back up? Because it wasn't trained when they got their MBAs. So you have to equip them to be able to understand how to even remain and become more creative.
Because a lot of people think, oh, well, if I need creative rest, I'll go and take an art class or I'll go and learn to play an instrument. But you say that's not creative rest.
No, that's actually putting a demand on your creativity.
That's expending creative energy.
Exactly. You're using creative energy. However, I do love those two activities you just mentioned because for some people, they are how they get emotional rest. Because in that moment of creating that art or learning to strum the guitar or play the piano, you are learning how to release whatever feelings are inside of you in that moment without fear of judgment. Because whatever art you created is the art you create. And it's really for you, not for anybody else to enjoy. And so for a lot of people, that can be a moment of emotional rest because it may be one of the few times that they are truly authentically sharing a part of themselves without their filter.
Talk about social rest. What expends our social energy these days?
People. So people are draining. So, and that's the thing.
People
Most of
are
us
draining.
Yes.
Sandra, they are. They're really draining.
And usually the people you love the most are the most draining.
It's true.
Because they need something from you. I mean, my kids, I adore my sons. They're both teenagers now, both graduated off, headed off to college. I adore them, but they're draining. They're the people who need me the most. They require the most from me. It's the same with our spouses, our colleagues, the people we work with or for. And so we then have to look at who are the people in our life that don't need anything from us. And for a lot of people, they can't name two people who don't need anything from them. True friends, where you just hang out and you have fun and it's life-giving and they're pouring back into you. That's really what social rest is about. And so those relationships that are putting demands on you, that's what drains it. And then looking at who are the people that pour back into you.
On the note of pouring back in and draining, I think it's so important. One of the things that you say that blew my mind when I first heard it is people think that rest is about stopping doing things. But in actual fact, it's not necessarily. It's about doing things. So if we think of the 7 different aspects that you've talked about as buckets that are being constantly drained, to rest, we have to fill them, right?
Yes. And that is the mindset shift that I think people have the hardest time with. When I mention rest, and automatically most people think of stopping, cessation. It's like, oh, I need to stop something. I need to go on vacation or a sabbatical, or I need to quit my job, or some other idea of cessation, calling it quits and stopping it all. With rest, what I'm referring to is really about pouring back into the places of depletion. So it's not stopping, it's finding what fills all of these areas back up. What gets my physical energy back up? What gets my mental energy filled back up? All of these areas get used throughout the day in certain ways, depending on our careers, depending on our lifestyles, our family situations. Some of these you probably have filled all the time because you've already learned mechanisms for keeping those levels high. For some of us, 1 or 2 of these 7 might be areas we've never even thought about.
Yeah.
And so if you've never thought about it, chances are you're not doing anything to keep it filled either.
The first time this occurred to me, this idea, before I even had your structure, was when someone explained to me that there are 2 types of burnout for creative people. There's the burnout of actual physical hours and too much work, but then there's the burnout of repetition and doing the same thing again and again until you're bored. And if you're bored creatively, that is exhausting. So ironically, doing something new, doing something more, doing something extra can make you feel more rested and give you more creative energy.
Absolutely. And with creative rest, that's the thing. Well, it's why it's so different. A lot of people ask me within my book, Sacred Rest, I give examples for each of these 7, how to get more of. And people will say, well, what about this? Wouldn't this qualify? It's like the number of ways of getting rest in each area is endless. It's as individual as there are people. It's a matter of awakening to the fact that there are places you may not be getting restoration in, and then seeking out what fills you back up. Because creatively, one person, it may be going to the theater and actually appreciating art in that way. To another person, it might be appreciating natural beauty, going out to the lake or going out to the ocean and just looking at the vastness, or staring at the eclipse, looking at the stars. There's so many different ways that people get filled up. And we then have to take the judgment off of how people get rest and allow people to get it whatever way is beneficial for them.
I was thinking about social rest in this context because an introvert, for example, as I understand it, finds it very draining being with people, and they get rest socially by being alone. Whereas an extrovert finds it draining being alone and gets energy from being with people. So as you say, there's no sort of blueprint for everybody. What do? Observe your own feelings after a certain situation?
Absolutely. There's a high level of self-awareness and really personal leadership and being able to understand what you're needing to be the best version of yourself. As you mentioned, introverts tend to enjoy smaller connections or fewer connections with people, but even introverts have to have some life-giving people in their life. They just tend to like deeper, more connected, more intimate type relationships. And so they tend to have one or two people they're really close with, whereas extroverts still need those people, those life givers, but they're often the people who will get a group of life giving friends together and have a party around it. And so both need people. The number of people that they like to have that deeper level connection with tends to be different. And then how they enjoy the engagement, whether it's more intimate or if it's more of a party vibe.
I remember during COVID, one of the things that people said is how exhausted they were. And everyone was quite baffled by that because we were mostly just locked in our houses doing nothing. We weren't able to run around. We weren't able to see anyone. We weren't able to, in many cases, even physically exercise. Why were we so tired over that period?
Yeah, I must admit, the 7 types of rest framework in my book, Sacred Rest, more people found out about it during COVID, which is the exact opposite of what you would think, as you mentioned, because people were literally living the dream. They were working from home in their pajamas, is what every person in the world said they wanted to do. And then once it happened, they were like, this is tiring. And a big part of that is because we lost all our boundaries. Being able to physically go into the office, then hop in your car and come home, set some really definite work-life boundaries that helped us be able to maintain some level of work-life integration. However, when the natural boundaries were removed and then we had to personally manage our own boundaries, we had no frame of reference for that. No one knew how to have good, healthy personal work-life boundaries. Things started filtering over. People wouldn't take breaks where you would take a break at work because you got a 9 to 5, you get the 2 15-minute breaks, people would take them. At home, it's like, I'm on the break. So nobody would even do that. Zoom or Teams or whatever it was people were using, it felt like it was easier, but we didn't realize how much sensory overload we were experiencing when we were sitting in those meetings with 15 screens showing different people's backgrounds. We didn't realize how draining that was. And we weren't stopping because we thought, we're sitting in our chair. Why should I be tired? There was just no frame of reference of how to manage that.
And now that the pandemic is thankfully behind us, more or less, there has been a remainder of hybrid work for a lot of people who are in office-based jobs. And I've read a lot about, for perhaps some of the reasons you say, they're still feeling very tired, even though they are even more now living the dream in saying, I've got certain days at work, I've got certain days at home. Why is that?
Most companies are really good at asking people what it is that they desire to have to be happy at their job and to remain. What I find is they don't really do a great job at equipping them to be able to manage it in such a way that it actually helps them to still feel energized. Most of the time when we are working with a company, what I'm finding when we do our initial assessment is that the people within the company, they are passionate usually about the work they're doing, but they don't actually have energy for what they're passionate about. So they're showing up with their exhaustion. They're showing up as what we call functional burnouts. They're in their seat, they're present, they're smiling at the meetings, but they don't have any joy for the work anymore. Their body feels bad even as they're sitting in the chair. They don't even feel good as they're sitting there doing the work. And when the work is over, the work is not even at the highest capacity of what they're capable of. It's just good enough. It's what they can produce from their exhaustion. And so I find that for a lot of people, that are making this transition to be able to understand why they're feeling that way is requiring them to begin with understanding first what type of tired that they actually are and begin to do some habit stacking so that they can integrate restorative practices in the middle of their busy day. Not trying to find time for rest, not trying to, carve out time because there isn't any extra time. It just is what it is. But actually using the time that they already have at work and layering in some restorative practices so that they naturally start doing some of these things without thinking about it.
What are some examples? I've heard you talk about one workplace where they made everybody have the same neutral Zoom background.
That's a simple one I think every company should do to begin with. Because when you think about it, in the old days when we were all going into offices and sitting around to have a board meeting, everybody's in the same room. We're all seeing the same sensory input. Now, if you got 10 people on your board that you're sitting with, every single screen has a different image around it. The wallpaper, the bed in the background, the bookshelf, whatever it is.
The flatmate walking past in a towel.
Yeah. And you're looking at all of this stuff and your brain is processing it. Whether you are trying to process it or not, it naturally is processing it, which is exhausting. And so when you change it just to a uniform background that your entire team or company is using, it recreates being in a room together because everybody's seeing the same thing. Another example would be for those who are trying to have more creativity and staying inspired. Think about what are the images that actually make you feel inspired, whether it's images of the beach or beautiful locations or beautiful architecture or pictures, or it could be videos of something, whatever it is, start bringing some of those elements actually into your environment.
I hope you're loving this conversation as much as I am, and I hope you can understand why I was so excited to bring Saundra into your ears and this concept of 7 types of rest. I've been feeling a lot of fatigue lately over the past year and particularly over the last few months. So, of course, I'm going to use this opportunity to ask the brilliant doctor, an expert, about my own habits and discuss my own results from the rest quiz that she's created. Yeah, I am tired. Saundra, I want to ask you about a particular habit of mine that everybody at work teases me for, but I move my office furniture around a lot. I find it does something for me. I'm not quite sure what. What is that about?
That makes me think about specifically an emotional type of rest. It's almost like art. Because you think about interior design, it's a form of art, basically. It's a form of creativity. So you're using creative energy in that moment because you're thinking, but this will look better here.
Yes.
But you're also in the moment being able to place things where you feel they belong, which means you're being able to express your feelings in some way because you get to determine this feels right in this place here, wherever you move it to, or whatever you exchange out. I find the same thing for people who sometimes will say something just doesn't feel right, and they'll go in and they'll change their outfit and come back out with something else.
I do that too.
It's connecting with your authentic self. It's like, authentically, this is not representing me in this moment. And I choose me, I'm going to be represented, and I'm going to rearrange whatever has to be rearranged to adequately and authentically reflect me, which is basically at the core of emotional rest.
That's so interesting. So something that feels soothing to you on a basic level or restful, it's interesting to think about what kind of rest that might be. It might be creative rest. It might be mental rest. Are there particular times in a woman's life where she's most likely to feel exhausted? I'm thinking about childbirth, parenting little kids, divorce, menopause.
Honestly, I would probably answer that by saying transition of any sort, because any type of transition, the change itself puts a level of stress that requires a reevaluation of what rest is needed now. And I think too often we get in our habits where, like for myself, I knew that I needed emotional rest. That was the one that was deficient. However, when I started transitioning into, like right now, I spend a whole lot of time on the road traveling to speak at conferences and with organizations. With that, I now realize that physical rest is one I really have to pay more attention to, because pulling luggage and doing all the different things, which I didn't have to do when I was in the hospital. And so I think any type of transition, good or bad, requires us to take a new assessment of what's happening right now with me.
That's so interesting, because you know how people say that moving house is very stressful. It's almost like an intersection of all the different types of rest, because physically it's very demanding. And then mentally it's exhausting, because all the sort of muscle memory you have for reaching for a light switch, grabbing a fork, looking for the peanut butter, all of that's different. So suddenly you have to engage mentally every time you switch on a light or turn on a tap or look for a towel. And that goes on for a really long time. And then emotionally, there are feelings about moving from one to the other. Is that kind of an example of how you can need a lot of different types of rest at once?
Absolutely, especially as you mentioned with changes like that, those big transitions. Empty nest. I find a lot of women when all the kids are out, and now it's like, okay, what do I do with my attention now that I don't have people I'm having to take care of? Because all of these different changes in jobs.
Yeah,
there's a lot of women who I'm finding now who are stepping up in roles and taking on new leadership positions and starting their own companies and having to navigate that part of it, the advancement within their career and the stressors that come with that, and realizing a higher level of personal management's needed. Not just managing people. Yes, that's a necessary as well, but actual personal management, the level of self-awareness of what they need so that they can continue to grow their company. You know, one of the things that I probably get the most upset, probably isn't the right word, distressed probably is the right word, over emails that I get from women who say, I don't really know if I want my company to scale or to grow, or I don't really know if I want to take that new leadership position because I'm already so tired. And what is that going to look like if I go to the next level? I want to climb through the wall when I hear something like that, because that's the exact opposite of living a thriving life.
So what do you tell them?
What I tell them is, hey, let's take a look at what's making you feel this way. And let's actually get to the root cause of what's holding you back. Because that thought process of me actually being able to be more beneficial to the world does not mean that I have to sacrifice more of myself. There is a way to actually build and be more fruitful and to thrive in your life and not burn out in the process. And so it's a matter of taking those steps to go down that path.
Well, I did the rest quiz and, I'm not doing great. My big outliers, my emotional, you say that anything over a 25 is bad. You're feeling the effects of the rest and you need a change. My physical rest score is 26. My mental rest score is 31. My emotional rest score is 42. My spiritual rest score is 23. So I'm doing quite well there spiritually. I think that's since I became a grandmother. I really love spending time with my granddaughter. That feels very spiritually restful in a way that it didn't, spending time with my own children. There's something about being a grandparent that is restful, even though it's not physically restful. It's restful on another level. And also I'm very satisfied at work in terms of my spiritual, knowing my purpose. My social rest score is 37. And then my sensory and creative rest scores are 35. So I've got some work to do.
Heading toward that burnout phase. But I mean, your number's actually way better than mine then. I would probably say all of mine were probably close to 40, except for physical. I mean, being a doctor is not physically demanding. But yeah, my scores at the time would have all been in the 40s. And I think the thing is, we have to be aware, it's like a snapshot of how you're feeling in the moment. And so I always say, use it as a snapshot to then look and reflect on, what am I doing to pour back into the area where I see this deficit? Because chances are some of those, there are not very many things you're doing on a consistent basis to pour back into those areas. And so then it's just beginning to layer some of those into your day, your week, your month, depending on your schedule and different things.
Can you tell me one thing to do for my emotional rest score, which is an ugly 42? What can I do to emotionally rest? Or can you not tell that without knowing more?
Without knowing kind of a little bit more of your background. But one of the things I would say is make sure there's at least one person in your life. It could be a friend, it could be a spouse, it could be counselor, a therapist, whatever, but one person in your life where you never feel like you have to pretty up what you say. That you can literally say it exactly the way you want to say it and release it. And I'll just speak for myself. One of the things for emotional rest that I had to learn, that the hardest part for me of emotional rest wasn't sharing with people necessarily what I was feeling, like I'm mad, I'm sad, all of that. But it was actually a deeper level of vulnerability that I had to get to be able to actually feel emotionally rested. So in that situation, like if I'm at the bedside with a patient and they're dying and all of that, and of course I'm sad for them and all, telling my husband, at the end of the day, that made me sad, didn't help me feel emotionally rested. What actually helped me was actually going deeper and telling him what the moment did inside of me. Like, for example, I remember one time something happened. I don't remember what the details were, but I remember saying to him in that moment, I felt useless. I felt like all those 12 years of medical practice did not tell me what I needed to do to help this person. I could do nothing but stand there and hold their hand while whatever was going on inside of their body, because there was no medical science to help me with this. And I was like, I felt useless. I felt like I'd wasted all of these years of my life. Now, that was a really raw statement to say. And the thing is, it's not something he could fix. It's not like he could pat me on the back and make it all better. But I needed to tell the truth of how I felt in that moment. And in saying it, there was a freedom. It's like, I don't have to carry this feeling and feel bad for thinking it. I can just say it and be okay with, this is how I'm feeling in a moment.
Saundra, thank you so much. I've just looked at my life in such a different way through the framework of your 7 types of rest. And it's all I do. I just tell everybody about it. And it's made it so much easier to replenish because, I sleep fine. Sleep's never been a problem for me. And yet, look at my burnout. So thank you.
Oh, I appreciate it. It's been a joy chatting with you.
Well, there we go. Did you have any big aha moments listening to that? Do you have now maybe a better sense of exactly what kind of tired you might be and what kind of rest you need? I was really struck by the idea of emotional rest and that the solution is to make sure that we have relationships where we can be our most authentic selves. I'd never thought about that before, and I'd never thought about how emotionally taxing it is when you can't just be completely yourself. And this idea of finding people that don't need anything from us except for our vulnerability. I think maybe that's why it's so restful being around dogs or cats. The other thing that I thought was really interesting is when she talked about any time of transition is particularly exhausting emotionally. And I know that I really felt this at big transitional times in my kids' lives as well as my own, I guess because they are transitional times in my lives too. Like when my son left school, and then when he moved out of home, when he got married, when my daughter finished school, those times have been really emotional and really exhausting. And I never thought about that the idea of transition is emotionally exhausting. It can be so hard to figure it out, can't it? Because when you're tired, we often need more than one kind of rest. So I highly recommend that you take this rest quiz that Dr. Saundra Dalton-Smith has created to help you figure out where you might have a bit of work to do. Saundra also has a book, Sacred Rest, if you want to have a look at that. We'll put a link to where you can buy it in the show notes. Do you know I've got a newsletter? If you subscribe to Babbel, I'm writing about the rest quiz this week. I'll send you a link to it and just detail all those 7 different types of rest in case you want to, be reminded of them, because probably you were listening to this when you were, driving, walking, cooking, sleeping. Well, maybe you needed to sleep. Probably won't remember much if you're asleep. Anyway, I'll put a link in the show notes for my Babbel newsletter where I write about all kinds of things. Off you pop, take the quiz, call your bestie, and get some rest. This episode was produced by Kimberley, Braddish and Naima Brown with sound production by Leah Porges. I'm Mia Freedman, and good night.
If you're after more women's health news, well, is your full body health check. We drop an episode every week on a Thursday. Coming up next, we're talking about perimenopause and menopause. This is a big subject because there's about, 400 symptoms. There's lots of different ways to treat it. And of course, there's a lot of research incoming, as well as a lot of myths on social media. So make sure you stick around to check that out. There's a link to follow us in the show notes. Listen to us on Well, wherever you get your podcasts.
Mamma Mia acknowledges the traditional owners of the land we have recorded this podcast on, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures.